Here are some of the reasons why you might not want to start a prospect newsletter. Hi, I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. Whether you're going to write a prospect newsletter for your own business or you're going to write a prospect newsletter for clients, there are some legitimate reasons why you wouldn't want to do a prospect newsletter. First off, what is a prospect newsletter? A prospect newsletter is sent to unconverted leads and individuals who are targeted as highly valuable prospective customers. So if you're using a Dream 100 system where you make a list of the 100 most desirable customers and then you send them a prospect newsletter, you're going to mention things in the prospect newsletter that are going to catch their interest, they're going to raise their hand and either get into an appointment or to ask for more information about your products or services. Now, a prospect newsletter can be a single page. It can just be a letter. I've seen prospect newsletters for lawyers and accountants that is simply a letter that highlights 2 or 3 of the most interesting changes or seasonal activities. So if it's an accountant, it might be the taxes are coming. 3 things you need to know before you file taxes this year. A prospect newsletter can also contain pieces that position you as an individual. So if you're a real estate or insurance agent, you have a prospect newsletter, it's going to have a little bit about who you are and the characteristics of your relationship with a prospect. Now, again, these sound like benefits, but there are legitimate reasons why some businesses just shouldn't do a prospect newsletter. Now, a prospect newsletter doesn't have to be fancy. Now, I can recommend to you some very powerful individuals who put together prospect newsletters that you can either white label for your clients if you're a copywriter or a marketer, or you can even use yourself. There's also some that will do custom newsletters, but it can be expensive. So let's get into some of the reasons why folks might not do a prospect newsletter. They've pissed away their marketing, and they haven't done a very good job, and they don't have any money left to do a regular prospect newsletter. So you see, a prospect newsletter is every month. The newsletter itself demonstrates your ability to show up in a consistent way. And so if you don't have the money to do the newsletter over time, then you are going to not be able to deliver every month, and your clients will think you're an idiot. And they'll forget about you, just like email, newsletter, anything else. And by the way, a prospect newsletter can be by email, but I'm talking about a prospect newsletter you would print and mail to a prospect. See, that's a mistake a lot of people make. They try to build an email list, and then they send a prospect newsletter over email, and the prospects never see it. Now, remember, you're sending this to people who haven't given you permission to send them stuff, unless it's unconverted leads. But ultimately, if you haven't got that straight yet, where you have permission to email, then you may not want to send a prospect newsletter. You may actually want to scale down your email message and try to get postal addresses. And then when you get the postal addresses, then you mail a prospect newsletter. If you don't have any money to do a prospect newsletter, you can also start adding a premium to your rates that you use for marketing, because 9 times out of 10, when they don't have enough money to do a single letter, a first-class mail letter that is typed up and basically introduces who you are, what you can do for the prospect, and shares some stories and tips and ideas. You know, if you can't do that, you can't pay for postage, you got a bigger problem. But again, if you have a client and you're talking to them about a prospect newsletter and they're like, hey, a prospect newsletter might work for us, let's look at that. You need to make sure they got the money that they can do 12 months of this thing, that they can actually send something. And that means the difference between maybe a 4-page letter that's printed on 11 by 17 and then folded in half. That's a pretty low-cost mailing. Or just get a pile of letterhead. I worked with a client and they had this just closet full of letterhead. And I said, well, why do you got all this letterhead? And they said, well, we used to send it out all the time. I said, well, why aren't you sending it out anymore? And they said, because the phone number's bad on it. I said, oh, okay, well, we can fix that. And they're like, oh, no, we got 5,000 or 6,000 pages. We use them as scrap paper. So they literally have cases of this stuff. I said, no. We're going to do a prospect newsletter. There's 4 people in the office. Each person made a list of topics that they thought that their particular clients would be interested in. Each week they made a list of events, like customer success stories, new product announcements, different things that were valuable. Now, I would prefer a prospect newsletter not talk about products. It's more teasing, lead generation type of thing. But long story short, here's what we did. We wrote a one-page newsletter, front and back page, and we aligned it on so we did a PDF proof, and we aligned it so that it put a line through the old phone number and typed the new phone number right below it. Now, you didn't know you could do that. That's letterhead. We just treated it like a whole page rather than the letterhead. See, all their templates to use letterhead had this big block of kind of blocking the top of you couldn't print at the top of the page. We printed all the way up to the very top of the page, print it in the margins, and we turned this old paper into a prospect newsletter. We simply printed. It was good quality paper. We printed on the paper the newsletter. We dropped it in one of those little machines that fold the newsletter and stuff it in an envelope. And then we did have somebody sit in the office and put live stamps on it, but essentially for less than $1 a mailing, we were able to use up all of this inventory, cleared out a closet. Amazing. Closet was empty. Got all this inventory out. Periodically, we'd throw a little brochure in there under the same guise as we got all these damn brochures and nobody's sending them. Periodically, we'd throw a brochure in. We'd always have a call to action that said, hey, if there's something in this newsletter that is interesting to your business and you think may benefit you, please call. And then we put the correct phone number again. So we turned what was a waste into income. Now, it's about $1 a letter as a good measure. It didn't really cost $1 a letter because this was done a little bit a while ago. But what happened? So the prospect newsletter was sent to target organizations who we were selling fleet services, so fleet fuel. So they had vehicles. They had already purchased, like they're buying from a competitor or something, or they purchased a different product in the same company. So maybe they purchased lubes, but they haven't purchased bulk fuel. Actually, this newsletter got so popular, we ended up sending it to everybody. But for this campaign list, we ended up with about 1,500 individuals. Now, the company did not want to send 1,500 letters just because of what I mentioned before. They didn't know if it would work. They didn't have the money to have $1,500 a month going towards this campaign. And they didn't want to dedicate the resources, the stuff, the envelopes, and such and such and such and such. Well, went with 200. So that's $200 a month. I paid for it out of my commission and out of my expense account. And I under the deal that I'd get a percentage when we started selling stuff. But ultimately, here's what happened. Within 6 months of regularly publishing this newsletter every month, we made $600,000 in new business. Okay, so $200 a month. I'm going to do the math for you in case you didn't figure it out. $200 a month for 6 months is what? My first number that came in my head is $24,000. I'm rolling in the back of my head that we did have somebody in the office to stuff the envelopes. We did have somebody who had to put the stamps on it. The envelopes had to be printed with the address of who we're mailing this newsletter to. So about $24,000. We got $600,000 in business in that same 6 months. Listen carefully, folks. Do you think we mailed the rest of the 1,500, the total list? You're damn right we mailed the whole list. Now, we ran out of paper in the closet, okay? But guess what? It's not about the paper you send it on. It's not about the layout of the newsletter. It's not about the masthead that you use. It's not about the color of the paper or the size of the envelope. It was something that was of sincere value to the prospects. We ended up sending it also to customers, and we did shift it a little bit into a customer newsletter, but that newsletter, at least while I was there, was consistently bringing in new prospects. It was passed along to other individuals. I actually ended up licensing a lot of materials, so I didn't write a whole newsletter. I licensed some of the materials, and then I had a print shop put everything together. So let's say the costs were the same. In a year, that's $1.2 million in new business for $48,000. See, would you spend $48,000 to make $1.2 million? You certainly would. For the price of an administrative assistant, this newsletter was produced and out the door. Now, again, you may not be able to handle the lead flow from a prospect newsletter. And that's why you might not want to do a prospect newsletter right now. And I suggest if that's the case, then you need to get your lead flow system straight, or you need to get your client's lead flow system straight. You may not want to write a prospect newsletter. Now, I know you guys are writing content for your website and your Twitter in all 20 minutes, and you're got your social medias all flowing and trying to get that content marketing going, yet you won't sit down to write a nice letter to a customer or a prospect to introduce to them some of the successes that you've delivered for your clients, or some of the outcomes that you've produced, or the opportunities that are there if only they were working with the right provider. Now, folks, this can be a simple letter. Dear friend, copywriting is a powerful part of how we attract new customers. And I find that many of my clients have heard of copywriting, but they don't know how to implement copywriting. Well, here are 3 tips to start improving the communications through copy with your clients. You send it to doctors. You send it to lawyers. You send it to private physicians, accountants, CPAs, all these professions out there. See, I specialize in reaching affluent business owners. There's such a thing as a commercial property developer. There's also commercial real estate agents. Their typical transaction has commissions of $100,000. Now, their jobs take a little longer to close out, but they have a commission of about $100,000 in some cases. And you don't have the time to write them a letter to introduce to them a way that they can reach better deals faster, how they can maintain a farm club of buyers of commercial real estate while connecting with those who have property to sell. Tips about how to find new leads and prospects. Insights on headlines, introducing the concept of headlines as a way of making your emails more interesting, or making personal letters a part of your marketing campaign, because for a high-ticket transaction, a lot of folks want to work with people they like and trust. And the way you show like and trust is to demonstrate that you're willing to take the extra step to make sure your clients are taken care of. Really, folks, I don't really care what the excuse is, but there are a lot of people that a prospect newsletter would not work for, not because of the concept of a prospect newsletter. It's just because they won't take the action necessary to produce one. They won't take the time to budget this prospecting element of their business. They won't take the time to learn about the lead generation element, and they're going to sell in their prospect newsletter and actually repel initial or possible clients to their business. And then there are some cases where the transaction actually isn't big enough. So your local coffee shop may have an email newsletter because they simply cannot afford the margins necessary to mail out a newsletter. Even though I do know that there are coffee shops where they do have a print newsletter, and they usually have it right in the store. So they don't mail it out. They save the stamp, and people who come in the store can get it. But I still think that mailing out has huge value, assuming you have a big ticket opportunity to pay for it. And now, why is it a big ticket item important? Well, big ticket item is not important, by the way. You can mail a letter, 2 letters a month, if they're $1 each, 2 letters a month for $24 a year per prospect. Do you make at least $24 on a sale? Now, of course, you guys are marketers. You know that if you make 100 sales and that's $2,400, you have to have a margin of $2,400 if you're only making 1 sale per every 100 contacts. But, you're usually going to make 1 sale for every 200 contacts in anything you send out. So you have to make the math work. And so some people, the math doesn't work, don't do a prospect newsletter. Do something else like Velpack or whatever. But let me wrap this up. A prospect newsletter, if you can do it, is a powerful way for high-ticket sales. It's a powerful way to build rapport. It's a powerful way to get in front of prospects in a meaningful way beyond the clutter and distractions of social media, websites, and the interwebs. And I'm sarcastic about the internet. I've been on the internet since 1989. Okay, I had an Apple IIe, and a dial-up 2400 baud modem. Okay, I dialed in to the internets, and I went through University Computer Systems, and I went through a local ISP that has shell accounts. I don't know if you understand what that is, but you'd have to use your shell account to then use text-based browsers, what we call a browser today. They use Gopher and Archie and all this stuff back then. And I know you're all enamored about the internet. The new internet, we've got a discussion board where people can chat messages and post pictures, and it's so awesome, called a Facebooks. There have been message boards around since dial-up modems. That's what I was doing before I was on the internet. Folks, listen carefully. If you can do a prospect newsletter, do it. If you can't, save up so that you can do it soon. Because for high-ticket deals, so if you're a copywriter, marketer, or business development professional, you can pay for a whole year's worth of prospect newsletters on 1 or 2 sales. Okay, so if you're sending 200 letters a month, and for every 200 letters you send, you usually get typically one client. That's a 0.5% conversion rate. And you don't necessarily get the client from the prospect newsletter. The client may raise their hand, and you have a discovery call, and then you might do 10 discovery calls before you get one client. But anyway, for what you do, 200 a month, 12 issues a year is 2,400 contacts. If you can't get one sale in 2,400 contacts, then come on, man. Come on, man. What's wrong with that? Anyway, I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing Copywriting Tips. A prospect newsletter is a powerful thing if you can sustain it for a 12-month period. If you're willing to make the investment to make a physical prospect newsletter happen. If you're willing to hold off on the pitch for the sale and open up the door to lead generation or discovery meetings or a webinar or something that when the prospect raises their hand, you know they're interested in something because it's the segmentation value. By the way, if a prospect newsletter never got you a client, the segmentation value alone puts money in your pocket. But again, if you're not ready for it, you still have questions about a prospect newsletter or how to get started either writing them for your clients or using one yourself, then visit me at www.adbriefings.co.uk and ask your questions. I have a program about prospect newsletters. I've done prospect newsletters for years. There are times where my opportunity can't afford a prospect newsletter. So I've got a lot of stuff going on, and I got a book I just published, and the book sells for $40. You're not going to sell a $40 book using a prospect newsletter. I keep the prospect newsletter going for my own self. I continue with, I use some email autoresponders for the low ticket items, and you make things work. Now, for some clients, they have a $400, $500, $4,000, $5,000 off initial offer. And so they can definitely do prospect newsletters, but for some reason they don't do it. And then they struggle, and then they do the prospect newsletter, and life just changes. So to wrap up, a prospect newsletter gives you an opportunity to sift and sort. It gives you an opportunity to present yourself as a human being and build credibility and position yourself in a marketplace. It helps you find new opportunities where others don't see. So they're hidden opportunities rather than on the internet where everything's pretty much public. And finally, a prospect newsletter is a physical token and demonstration of your ability to get something done consistently. Boy, folks, if you're not doing a prospect newsletter, you're missing out on a massive opportunity, but I understand you might have questions, concerns, frustrations. You might have done it in the past and it didn't work out. Let's talk about that. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefings Copywriting Tips. You can write in with your questions at www.adbriefings.co.uk. Don't worry about it if you spell it wrong. Don't worry about it if you do adbriefing.com. I own all the domains related to ad briefings. Go there and ask your questions. Just go to the contact page, fax me, send me a letter, send me an email if you got that. Ultimately, but email's got a lot of spam blockers and stuff. Ultimately, folks, get your questions answered because a prospect newsletter is going to transform your ability to create and keep profitable customers and turn business relationships into profits guaranteed. Thanks for listening. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefings Copywriting Tips.